Presented by Cursed by the Witch. Warning: use headphones before listening to horror podcast story. Voices in the Walls is a chilling psychological horror story that blends themes of isolation, paranoia, and the supernatural. The narrative centers around a young woman named Claire, who moves into a mysterious old house to escape her troubled past. However, her fresh start is soon overshadowed by eerie events as she begins hearing strange voices coming from the walls of the house. What initially appears to be a haunted house story evolves into something more complex, as the line between reality and Claire's deteriorating mental state begins to blur. The story explores the psychological breakdown of the protagonist while delving into the haunting atmosphere of the house itself, which seems to have a dark history that reaches out to claim Claire as its latest victim. Part 1: A New Beginning. The story begins with Claire, a young woman in her late 20s, moving into an old Victorian house located on the outskirts of a small, quiet town. Claire is seeking a fresh start after a traumatic breakup and the recent death of her father, both of which left her emotionally fragile. She hopes the isolation of the old house will help her recover and rebuild her life. The house is large, foreboding, and eerily quiet. It has been abandoned for years, and the townspeople tell her strange stories about its past, but Claire dismisses these tales as small-town superstition. She moves in, determined to fix the house and start anew. Despite its dilapidated state, Claire finds comfort in the solitude and begins to settle in. At first, the house seems peaceful, but Claire soon starts to notice small oddities: doors that creak open on their own, cold drafts even when the windows are closed, and strange shadows that seem to flicker in the corners of her vision. She brushes off these occurrences, attributing them to the age of the house and her own nerves. Part 2: The Voices begin. One night, Claire is awakened by a faint whispering sound coming from inside the walls of her bedroom. At first, she thinks it's just the wind or the old pipes, but as the nights go on, the whispers grow louder and more distinct. She begins hearing conversations, disjointed, broken sentences that don't make sense. The voices seem to be speaking in a language she can't understand, or sometimes they are just incoherent murmurs, like multiple people talking at once. Disturbed but not yet frightened, Claire tries to investigate. She taps on the walls, searching for any gaps or hidden vents that might be causing the noise, but finds nothing. The voices continue, coming and going at odd hours, always just low enough to make her question whether they are real or a figment of her imagination. They seem to come from every corner of the house, not just the bedroom. As the days pass, Claire becomes increasingly paranoid. She can no longer sleep, kept awake by the incessant whispering. Her friends from the town visit occasionally, but she doesn't tell them about the voices, fearing they will think she's losing her mind. The isolation and lack of sleep start to take a toll on her, and her behavior becomes erratic. Part 3: The House's Dark History. Claire becomes obsessed with discovering the source of the voices. She visits the local library to research the history of the house, uncovering a string of dark events associated with it. The house was originally built by a wealthy family in the late 1800s, but over the years, many of its residents had met tragic and mysterious fates. Several were found dead under strange circumstances, and rumors of madness and strange occurrences plagued the house's reputation. One particularly disturbing story she uncovers is about a woman who lived in the house decades ago and was found dead in her bedroom, surrounded by symbols drawn on the walls. Town records indicate that this woman had complained about hearing voices, claiming they were telling her to do horrible things. The official cause of death was listed as suicide, but Claire reads between the lines and realizes that the woman had likely been driven to madness by the same voices that now haunt her. Claire also finds references to occult rituals that may have been conducted in the house by one of its former owners. These rituals were said to summon entities or spirits, binding them to the physical space of the house. The voices, it seems, are not just a product of Claire's imagination, they are real, and they are connected to the house's sinister past. Part 4: The Descent into Madness. As Claire uncovers more about the house's dark history, the voices in the walls grow louder and more insistent. They no longer sound like incoherent murmurs, now, they speak directly to her, calling her name, mocking her, and telling her things about her own life that no one else could know. The voices become increasingly hostile, urging her to harm herself or others. Claire begins to question her own sanity. Are the voices real, or is she losing her mind just like the previous residents? Her friends begin to worry about her mental state, noticing how withdrawn and paranoid she has become. Claire, on the other hand, grows increasingly suspicious of them, convinced that they are conspiring against her or that they are part of whatever malevolent force is haunting the house. One night, Claire experiences a terrifying vision. The walls of the house seem to pulse and breathe as if they are alive, and shadowy figures move through the house, watching her with glowing eyes. The voices scream at her, louder than ever, and Claire flees to the basement in a panic. There, she discovers an old, sealed-off room that wasn't listed in any of the house's blueprints. Part 5, The Discovery of the Sealed Room. The room in the basement is small and windowless, with stone walls that feel unnaturally cold. Inside, Claire finds strange, arcane symbols carved into the walls and floor. There are old books and remnants of occult paraphernalia scattered across the room, along with the skeletal remains of what appears to be a young woman. The discovery sends Claire into a spiral of terror. She realizes that the house was indeed the site of dark rituals, and the spirits or entities summoned during those rituals never left. They have been trapped in the house, lurking in the walls, feeding on the fear and paranoia of its residents. The whispers in the walls return, but now they are deafening, filling her head with thoughts that are not her own. The voices seem to be driving her toward something, pushing her toward a final, irreversible act. Claire becomes convinced that the house wants her to suffer the same fate as the woman in the basement. Part 6, The Final Confrontation. Claire's final days in the house are a blur of terror and confusion. She no longer trusts anyone, not even herself. The voices now control her every waking thought, and she is unable to sleep, eat, or think clearly. She sees the shadowy figures everywhere, following her, whispering in her ear, taunting her. The walls seem to close in on her, suffocating her as if the house itself is alive and hungry. In a moment of desperation, Claire decides to confront the evil presence head-on. Armed with nothing but her will to survive, she returns to the basement and begins destroying everything in the sealed room, tearing down the symbols, burning the old books, and smashing the remains of the ritualistic objects. As she does this, the voices reach a fever pitch, screaming in rage and agony. The house shakes violently, as if the very foundation is coming apart. Claire feels a dark presence closing in on her, suffocating her, but she continues to destroy everything in her path, hoping that this will break the curse that binds the spirits to the house. Part 7, The Aftermath. In the end, Claire manages to escape the house, but she is forever changed by her experience. The police and townspeople find her wandering the streets in a daze, covered in dirt and blood, mumbling incoherently about voices and shadows. The authorities write her off as mentally unstable, believing that she had a nervous breakdown. The house is boarded up once more, its dark secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. However, the final twist of the story reveals that the voices are still there, trapped in the walls, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to move in and awaken them. Though Claire survives, she is left deeply traumatized, her mind forever scarred by the horrors she experienced. She hears the voices sometimes, even outside the house, whispering faintly in the back of her mind, reminding her that they are never truly gone. Themes and Atmosphere. Voices in the Walls is a story about isolation, fear, and the slow descent into madness. It plays on the primal fear of being watched, of unseen entities lurking just out of sight. The house serves as both a physical and psychological prison for Claire, trapping her in a cycle of fear and paranoia. The supernatural elements of the story are tied to themes of guilt, trauma, and unresolved emotions, as the voices seem to feed on Claire's vulnerabilities. The atmosphere is tense and claustrophobic, with the house itself becoming a character in the story, a malevolent force that traps and consumes those who live within it. The gradual unraveling of Claire's sanity is portrayed in a way that keeps the reader guessing, are the voices real, or are they a manifestation of her fragile mental state? The story's ending leaves a lingering sense of dread, suggesting that the house's evil is far from defeated and that the cycle of horror will continue with the next resident. Conclusion. Voices in the Walls is a haunting and suspenseful psychological horror story that explores the intersection of the supernatural and the psychological. With its eerie setting, slow-building tension, and a protagonist who slowly. Thank you for watching. Just like and subscribe.